First Patriots, Chapter 7. After leaving the castle, we found a secluded area in a nearby forest to time jump back to modern day. Liberty suggested that I put duct tape over Elizabeth's mouth so we wouldn't have to hear her incessant complaining about getting kicked out of Windsor Castle. Rushing from history, Liberty said. Like clockwork, we arrived back at Manchester in the same hallway just seconds after we had left. In fact, Cam must have just finished changing into his modern-day clothes and was walking back to the classroom when he noticed us in the hallway. "Haven't you guys left yet?" Cam asked. "What's taking you so?" That's when he noticed the dress that Elizabeth was wearing. What happened to her? "Would you believe she fell into a pond?" Liberty said. "More like thrown into a pond," Elizabeth countered. Why was Elizabeth wearing a dress? She wanted to impress the king. She thinks she is a princess. She fell into a pond. She was riding a horse. "A pond?" asked Cam. "Was there a toad in the pond that kissed her and she turned into a princess?" "I wouldn't let a toad kiss me. Gross. If we were in England, I'd have the guards throw you into the dungeon," Elizabeth said. "She may look like a princess, but she's acting like a toad," Cam replied. "Let's get back into the classroom. I imagine the video of Benjamin Franklin is almost over." "Quick, someone take a picture of me wearing this dress," said Elizabeth as she handed Tommy her phone. "It's the least you can do after ruining my visit with King George." Tommy took a quick picture and handed the phone back to Elizabeth. "I can't wait to post this on Facebook and Pinterest and Instagram and—" Liberty interrupted and said, "I remember when people would simply post things to doors. For example, in 1770, I remember a posting about the Boston Massacre." "The mass of what?" Tommy asked. "The Boston Massacre," Cam said. Liberty agreed. "Yes, I saw a drawing of it that Paul Revere engraved, printed, and posted all over Boston. I suppose if Paul Revere had Facebook or Instagram, he would have posted it there as well." "Oh, I wish I had taken a picture of King George," Elizabeth sighed, as if she were daydreaming. "He looked magnificent." Elizabeth twirled around and around as she waltzed down the hallway. "Adieu!" Why did Elizabeth think that King George looked magnificent? She liked how powerful he was. She thought he looked like her dad. He gave her a blue dress. I looked at Tommy and Cam, who looked as worried as I did. "Should we try to stop her? What's going to happen when Principal Sherman sees her dress?" says Tommy. "Yeah, she has all the evidence she needs to bust us," Cam said. "Let's not panic." I said. "I don't think she's in any hurry to burn the bridge that let her meet King George. I'd say she's very happy." "I'd say she's loopy," Cam said. "I'd say she's nutso," said Tommy. "I'd say her chimney is missing a few bricks," said Liberty, who snorted at his own joke. "I'd say you better get in here," said Freedom, who stuck her head out the classroom door. "The video you took of Benjamin Franklin just ended, and the kids are wondering where you are." I turned to Tommy and Cam and said, "After Tommy changes his clothes, I need the two of you to go to the teacher's lounge and grab the sound system and speakers. Bring them here so Liberty can perform his stomp act about the Stamp Act." Cam started to laugh and said, "I'm sorry for laughing, but it sounds really funny every time you say that." Liberty replied, "I always laugh when I hear the question, how much wood could a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood? If I ever meet a woodchuck, I'm going to ask him if woodchucks really do chuck wood, and if so, how much wood would he really chuck if he could? I mean, if he chucks too much wood, could a woodchuck upchuck the chucked wood?" The things this horse says, I thought. I smiled and pulled Liberty's halter toward the classroom door. "Let's go. It's time for honors history." The two boys darted down the hallway, and Liberty and I entered the classroom. Upon seeing us, the students quickly settled down. What terms did they use to describe Elizabeth? Check all that apply. Happy? Crazy? Loopy? Nutso? Pretty? Her chimney is missing a few bricks. I walked to the front of the class and said, "We're going to have a quick test on the movie about Benjamin Franklin that you just watched. I'm going to pass out a piece of paper, and I want you to answer the question, why were the colonies opposed to the Stamp Act?" I heard a couple of moans and sighs. I continued, "Before you answer, I'll need you to give me $5 each for the paper you're going to use to take the test." This time I heard lots of moans, gasps, sighs, and even, "That's a ripoff." "Is there a problem?" I asked. A boy in the middle of the room raised his hand and said, "It's not fair." And then a girl said, "Don't my parents already pay taxes for this?" Another boy said, "Do we have to use your paper? If I use my own, do I still have to pay the $5? I smiled and said, "Yes, you still have to pay the $5. Yes, I assume your parents are paying taxes already. And yes, I'm requiring you to pay this paper tax because it's going to help me pay off some debts." Now it seems like the whole class was in an uproar. "Mr. Revere," said Freedom from the back of the class, "this sounds a lot like the stamp tax that Parliament and the King demanded that the colonies pay. And we sound a lot like the colonists who didn't think it was fair." "Very good, Freedom. I'm glad to know that the video you watched may have taught you something. In any case, I think Parliament and the King are right, so I need you to pay me now." What is the name of the act that the King imposed on the colonists? Stomp, stump, stimp, stamp. "Seriously?" Freedom smirked, thinking I was kidding. "What if the whole class decides not to pay the tax? What if we refuse?" "Is that how all of you feel?" I asked as I looked around the room. "I'm with Freedom. Me too. I'm not paying. No way. Freedom's right," said the students until they all started chanting, "We won't pay. We won't pay. We won't pay." With a wide grin, I finally held up my hands to quiet the student mob and said, "Congratulations. You passed the test and you'll get an A." As the class cheered, Tommy and Cam entered the room carrying the sound system and speakers. I quickly set them up and invited Liberty to come to the front of the room. With a short introduction, I said, "It's my pleasure to introduce Liberty and his Stomp Act about the Stamp Act." The music started. Liberty began stomping to the beat, and then he started to sing. "Put a stamp on the fire, go tell the British Empire, your Stamp Act agents are fired, you're simply in our way. Go tell King George III, his Stamp Act is absurd, this is our final word, you're simply in our way. This law is bogus, taxing all our paper products, do you really think you own us? Listen to the Stamp Act Congress, hey, we just left you, and this is crazy. You never asked us, don't tax our cronies. We've got Ben Franklin and Patrick Henry. We never asked them, don't tax our colonies. Because your taxes aren't fair, make us so mad. You make us so mad. You make us so, so mad. Because your taxes aren't fair, you make us so mad. And you should know that. History lesson they would never forget. The next day I had to wake up Liberty so we could have lunch before my class started. He said he was still tired and blamed it on all the time jumping. "Well, let's get some food in you because we'll need to time jump today to meet Samuel Adams," I said. Liberty yawned and replied, "Oh, I remember King George said that Samuel Adams was a rebel. Is that true?" "Yes." "Who are they going to meet today?" "First and last name only. Samuel Adams." Yes, Samuel Adams fanned the flames of the Revolutionary War in Boston. He was also a cousin to the American hero John Adams. If possible, I'd like to find Samuel and discover the truth. From what I've heard, he was a stubborn, hot-headed, and crafty man who never doubted the cause of freedom. "Oh, he sounds delightful," Liberty said with sarcasm. I smiled and said, "Maybe not delightful, but he knew how to motivate people to fight for their liberties. And I want to see how he did it. I want to know what role he played in Boston and what he was truly like." Fine with me, but I don't think I'm adding him to my Christmas card list. Well, maybe our visit will change your mind, I said. Liberty paused before he said, Benjamin Franklin, Patrick Henry, Samuel Adams. I'm certain I have a connection with all of these exceptional Americans, but I can't seem to put my hoof on it. Well, you are from the Revolutionary time period, I reminded him. Yes, I am certain of that, said Liberty. Oh, and I am also certain that I'm famished. No surprise, I thought. On our way to Manchester Middle School, we stopped and ate bagels and cream cheese. Liberty ate 18 bagels in honor of the 18th century. Oh, full stomach always makes me sleepy, he said. Maybe you could take a quick nap during part of my history lesson. As we approached the front doors of the school, Liberty turned invisible. Who was Samuel Adams' cousin? First and last name only. Samuel Adams' cousin was John Adams. Let's see, where did that go? Where did it go? Oh, right at the top. He was a cousin to the American hero John Adams, who was also the second president of the United States. John Adams. And then the next page looks like we have a map. A map sketched by John Adams of the taverns in Braintree and Weymouth, 1761. And then we have a picture of Samuel Adams. The bell would ring at any second, and students would flood the hallways as they headed toward their final class of the day. As we turned the final corner, I saw Elizabeth slip into the honors history classroom. I assume Liberty saw her too, but just to be sure, I said, Did you see Elizabeth? Liberty exhaled and reappeared by my side. Yes, and she looked a little sneaky. I'll stay invisible until we know what she's up to. He took a deep breath and disappeared again. At the sound of the bell, I saw students exit other classrooms along the hallway. We quickly slipped inside the honors history room, and I noticed Elizabeth sitting in her regular seat. She sweetly said, Hello, Mr. Revere. I think we got off on the wrong foot. I've decided that Manchester Middle School definitely needs a history teacher with your special skills. By the way, where's Liberty? She looked behind me as if she was waiting for Liberty to enter. I knew she was up to something, but what? I casually replied, Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm glad to have you back in honors history. Liberty will be here soon. What did Principal Sherman say about your new dress? Oh, I told him I went shopping and just had to have it for the homecoming dance. No worries, Mr. Revere. I've got you covered. I know how to play this game. You scratch my back, and I'll scratch yours. Tommy entered the classroom and paused when he saw Elizabeth. Hi, Thomas. Did you miss me? Said Elizabeth, her words dripping with sweetness. No offense, but not really. Elizabeth told her dad she bought the blue dress for what occasion? A wedding, homecoming, graduation, or prom. No matter. I need to talk to you about the next time we time jump. The possibilities are so exciting, and I know just where I want to. Just then the door opened and several more students began walking in. I was relieved for the interruption. Something was definitely up with Elizabeth. She was acting very strange since our visit with King George. Finally, the bell rang for class to start, and I noticed Cam was standing in the middle of the room, unsure about where to sit. It looks like there's a desk in the middle of the classroom. I pointed to the empty desk next to Freedom. Once Cam was seated, I took a quick roll and welcomed everyone. Liberty finally exhaled and appeared behind Freedom and Cam. I was always impressed at how long he could hold his breath and stay invisible. I turned, grabbed a piece of chalk, and wrote on the chalkboard, The Townshend Acts, I said. The Stamp Act wasn't the only act or law that Parliament created, and King George III approved to tax the 13 colonies. The Quartering Act, the Declaratory Act, and numerous other acts continued to make the colonies boil with anger and hatred toward King George. But it was the Townshend Acts that may have finally pushed the colonies over the edge. Elizabeth raised her hand and said, You're making King George sound like a monster. Actually, he was a very nice guy with incredible taste in fashion, gorgeous blue eyes, and let's not forget, he was a king. Thank you, Elizabeth, I said. But let's finish our discussion by saying that the Townshend Acts were a series of 1767 laws named for Charles Townshend, the British Chancellor. Check all of the acts the king imposed on the colonists. The Stomp Act. No, that was Liberty. Townshend Acts. Yes. Quartering Act. Yes. Stamp Act. Yes. Nickeling Act. No. Declaratory Act. Yes. This is a notice from the Boston merchants calling for a complete repeal of the Townshend duties, 1769. There's a picture of Charles Townshend by Joshua Reynolds. Actually, a portrait, I'm sorry. That would be a painting. Let's finish our discussion by saying that the Townshend Acts were a series of 1767 laws named for Charles Townshend, the British Chancellor of the Treasury. He's the guy keeping track of all the king's money. These laws place new taxes on glass, lead, paints, paper, and tea. How do you think the colonies felt about paying more and more taxes? Cam started singing the chorus from Liberty's Stamp Act song, "Because your taxes aren't fair, you make us so mad, you make us so, so mad." The class laughed as Cam took a bow from his seat. Exactly, I said. Many of the colonists protested. Sometimes they showed violence against British soldiers and the British tax collectors. So King George sent more British troops to the colonies. In fact, he sent 4,000 redcoats to the city of Boston, which only had 20,000 residents at the time. "It sounds like Boston was swarming with redcoats," said Tommy. "I wish I could take all of you back to Boston on March 5th of 1770, I said. "You'll need to use your imaginations for this. If it helps to close your eyes, please do. Daydream, if you will, to March 5th, 1770. You're in Boston, Massachusetts. It is evening and the moon is full. You're on King Street in front of the customs office. Street lanterns dimly light the way as you walk along the cobblestone, 18th century brick buildings, and suddenly the walls of the classroom started to spin. I leaned back onto the teacher's desk for fear that I might topple over. Was I spinning, or was the room spinning? I wasn't sure. The students seemed to notice it as well. A golden purple swirling pattern raced along the walls and encircled us until the walls completely vanished, and the Bostonian scene I had just described appeared all around us. What city are they imagining about? Boston. Capital B, it's a proper noun. Even the cobblestone street was beneath our desks and feet. I slid my foot across the ground and it was smooth like a classroom floor, not like cobblestone. "Mr. Revere, is this supposed to be happening?" asked Tommy. "No worries," I said, lying. "Stay in your seats. You're experiencing a new technological teaching moment." I honestly had no idea what was happening. It looked like we were back in time, but that was impossible. We hadn't jumped through a portal. We would need Liberty to do that. And that's when it hit me. Liberty. This had to be his doing. I looked to the back of the room and noticed him leaning up against the back wall, fast asleep. He must be dreaming this. Somehow his subconscious had the ability to stimulate the historical event I was describing. Liberty was recreating history all around us. None of it was real, but the virtual experience made us feel like we were actually there. Unbelievable! I decided to make the most of the situation and continued with my storytelling. Suddenly, you find yourself with a mob of people who start to throw snow, ice, and rocks at the British soldiers standing in front of the customs office. Sure enough, as I described the scene, a large mob of colonists appeared to the right of us. To the left appeared a small group of British soldiers. A colonist stood only a few yards away from me and threw a chunk of ice. It hurtled directly at me on its way toward the soldiers. Instinctively, I winced and flinched right before the ice hit me in the side of the face. But surprisingly, the ice chunk went right through my head and continued forward, hitting the chest of a British soldier. I'd forgotten this was just a simulation. It was just a virtual holographic representation that Liberty was creating while dreaming. Who did the colonists throw a chunk of ice at? Redcoats. At a British soldier. A British soldier. Yep, you're going to need to put a full phrase. I'll let you see it right there so you know what you're writing. This is a poster that described the Boston Massacre, March 5th, 1770. What was the date of the Boston Massacre? March 5th, 1770. Copy it right there. March 5th, 1770. Other student, let me back up here. It seems so real. I noticed other students dodging snow, ice, and rocks as the projectiles flew through the air. I continued with my narration and shouted, "The redcoats tried to keep order and stop the colonists from demonstrating against the Townshend Acts. However, the soldiers were forbidden to shoot anyone unless they had an order from a civil magistrate who was like a judge. The Americans and Patriots knew this, so they kept trash-talking and taunting the British troops. Confusion and chaos only increased when the bells began to ring from the nearby old brick church. Again, the literal sound of church bells rang through my ears as the chaos continued all around us. I knew the bell was normally used as a fire alarm in 18th century Boston, so it wasn't surprising when people started shouting, 'Where's the fire?' I continued. The large, angry crowd pressed in on the 9 British soldiers who were desperately outnumbered. Suddenly, one of the British soldiers is knocked down by something hitting his head, and someone yells, 'Fire!' Sound of gunshots ripped through the air, and suddenly the classroom walls returned as the sights and sounds of 1770 Boston vanished like a magical act. "Oh, sorry. I must have dozed off for a minute," said Liberty, a bit startled. "Did I miss anything? Last thing I remember, you were talking about Boston, and then I had the strangest dream. More like a nightmare." "That was awesome," said a boy in the front row. "This class rocks," said another boy. "You're the best teacher ever," said a girl sitting by the window. "How did you do that?" How many British soldiers were there? Oh, where is that? Is it back on the page way before? I don't think so. How many soldiers? Small group. This just says a small group. Oh, it must tell us somewhere. Okay, it should be on the other page. The redcoats. Looking for a number. I continued. The large, angry crowd pressed in on the 9 British soldiers. Yep, there were 9. Gratefully, the students seemed clueless that Liberty was the source of the simulation. "Oh, it's all high-tech, cinematronics," I said, hoping it was enough. "Seriously?" said Liberty. "I feel like I missed something." Just when I tried to get the class back on track, the school fire alarm sounded. Principal Sherman's voice was heard on the school intercom system. He said, "Dear students, this is our annual school fire drill. Please calmly leave your classrooms and head outside to the blacktop. Thank you." I followed the students out of the room, but just before I passed through the doorway, I noticed Freedom and Cam huddled with Liberty. I walked to the back of the room and asked, "I take it the 3 of you have something on your mind?" "Mr. Revere," said Cam, "since Freedom and I didn't time travel with you last time, do you think we could go now? I'd love to go to Boston in 1770. We could learn more about the Boston Massacre." "I'm in," said Freedom enthusiastically. "We could be back before anyone realizes we're missing." Liberty nodded rapidly and nearly danced in place. "All right," I said. The 3 of them cheered in unison. "You'll have to change your clothes in the past. If you run to the restroom now, you may get caught by another teacher. Help me move these desks to either side of the room so we have a running path for Liberty." In a matter of seconds, we were ready to go. Freedom and Cam rode on Liberty, and I followed close behind. The three of them cheered in unison. What does unison mean? Unison. They did it all at the same time. Rush, rush, rushing to history, said Liberty. We were headed to Boston, and I was excited to find Samuel Adams. I was nervous at the same time. I had just witnessed what happened in Boston on March 5th.